Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear, little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
We never expect that our children will die before us. Why would we? It's not the natural order of life. When faced with the possibility that her 34-year-old daughter Jessica might die from brain cancer, Julie Brown turned to her writing for solace, which she says has become part of her evolution. After Jessica's passing, this caregiving and courageous mother is now inspired to write the next chapter of her life in hopes of helping others. Join us as Colby and I hold the light with Julie Brown. Julie, welcome to Holding the Light, and thank you for being with us. We're talking today with a wife, mother of 2 children, and a very proud grandmother. But I've also discovered you are many things: a massage therapist, and an energy healer, a blogger, author of a book which I had the pleasure of reading cover to cover myself. And at the heart of your soul, you're a caregiver, both to your family and now to hospice patients and their families. There's so much to talk about in this podcast. But you're also a grieving mom who did the unimaginably difficult job of caring for an adult child with brain cancer and who is now a grieving parent. So first, we want to say that we're so sorry for your loss, truly.
Thank you.
You have 2 children, Jeremy and Jessica. So start with, what was your family unit like before your kids grew and flew?
Well, I was a young mom. I was 16 when I had my first child. My kids were 4 years and 9 months apart. Jeremy was the older. We lived in Scarborough. Kids went to local schools. My husband was a builder, still is a builder after 40 some odd years. I worked both in the house. I did some childcare, but I also worked outside of the house and continuously through the years helped manage the family construction business.
And then your children grew and moved out of the house and got married and all the things.
All the things.
Yeah. So take us to when you first understood that your daughter had cancer.
Well, interesting, I have to back up a little bit because one of her best friends growing up in Scarborough, who lived across the street from us, actually, my daughter was going to be one of the bridesmaids in her wedding. And in 2011, got the news that she had a brain aneurysm and was in the hospital in Boston. My daughter went down a couple of days in a row, but her friend didn't survive. And it was about 3 months before the wedding that happened. That prompted my daughter to reach out to her doctor because she had some concerns about some headaches that she was having, headaches and dizziness. And I have a lot of medical background. I wasn't really all that concerned about the headaches at that point. She had just had 2 children close together, and I was attributing a lot of that to stress of motherhood and hormones. She finally was able to get an appointment, had a MRI, and they called her to tell her that she had a brain tumor. So if it wasn't for what had happened with her friend Carolina, who knows how long that would have taken to find out.
And just being a self-advocate.
Right.
Yeah. So what was that like for you? As a mom, and you're a healer and a protector. What was it like to hear the news? How did it affect you?
Oh, it was devastating. At the time, I was doing massage therapy full-time. I had a private practice, so she was managing the family business with 2 young kids, which allowed her a lot of flexibility at the time. But then having this happen just, added a whole new dimension to our life. Immediately, I went into, panic mode of, how can I best serve the family, not just her and her kids, but, our family as a whole.
I can imagine. Yeah. So after her diagnosis, and she had a successful first treatment of cancer, correct?
Correct. She had surgery, which the boys were really little at the time. They were like 4 and 5. And when she came out of the hospital, there really was no physical evidence. She didn't have a bandage on her head. She didn't lose any hair. She had a year of oral chemotherapy. And the only change, immediate change after the surgery was some memory and speech. So she had speech therapy for a while, but it was easy enough for us to integrate all of that into our life with the boys. So we made things as normal as possible for them. And then she had 5 really good years, and it was fairly easy to, I guess, go into that state of, I think now I can call it denial. I'm sure at some point her doctors must have told us the potential for a brain tumor to return is likely, but I don't remember living like that.
You were in a state of hopefulness, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, so much so that you wrote a book. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I encouraged her to write a book about all that she had gone through, and she had no interest. So I started to write a little bit about her story, and then it ended up being more like my memoir and sharing my view as a mom of an adult child with cancer and all the bits and pieces. I really wanted to leave a legacy for my kids and grandkids to know my story.
What was that writing process like? That must have been really difficult to sit down with yourself and reflect, and internalize a lot of the grief that you were experiencing and your experiences and all it was that you had gone through taking care of Jessica. What was that experience like in writing the book?
I think at that point, I had no idea what the caregiving piece was going to be like. It was just dipping my toes in because she didn't have as many needs that time. She was very active in the Brain Aneurysm Society or Association in the Brain Aneurysm Association in Portland, Maine, which is very active with Carolina's mother. That's how she found her passion to give back. That led to us participating in this organization called the National Brain Tumor Society, where they every May have a organization that meets in Washington, D.C. to advocate for funding for brain tumors, brain cancer, basically. So she wanted to participate in that in 2016 and asked me to come along as kind of her support person. And of course, I went along, but she didn't need my support. She was a great advocate. And then we went again in 2017. And I actually found somebody who had written a book during that time. And that is what led me to reach out to that person to help me with my book.
I found your book just super inspiring for women, just to recognize the importance of finding out who you are and who you want to be and really putting yourself first and your candidness about all the phases of your life. And as I shared with you after reading it, I just couldn't accept what the reader didn't know then. That sadly we know now that Jessica did not survive. So do you plan to write a continuation to this story, a second book?
Actually, it's in the works right now. I have no idea when I'll complete it, but it's been a big part of my evolution since she passed away, which next week will be the 5-year anniversary. I just feel like it's a necessary piece.
And it's part of your healing, right? Your writing is part of your healing.
Yes. Along with the blog.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's great to share with people who are listening right now that might be just starting the grief journey. What would you say about finding ways to heal like you have in writing?
During the year of 2018, when she had been diagnosed again and gone through surgery and chemo and radiation, I was keeping a journal in CaringBridge, which is a popular writing space for people to just notify family and friends of information, so you're not repeating the same stories all over again. And after she passed away in January of 2019, I missed that. I missed having an avenue to share that information with, and what was going on with her boys and in my grief journey. And I felt really disconnected from people. You know, you have the service and people, you know, stay in touch for the first few days, weeks, even a few months. And then people get back to their life, and I totally understand that. But there's so much isolation, and this was even before COVID. This was the year before COVID. So I began a blog, and I needed to have something hopeful to look at as well. I wanted to share the ways that I was seeing her, hearing her in a song or seeing a butterfly, or just the little messages that I was getting.
I read many of your blog posts. One that really struck me was like maybe the second anniversary of her passing. You shared this shift that you had from anger to gratitude. Tell us about that.
I think it was called the softening. I found myself the first year trying to keep things, I guess what I called normal, you know, all the holidays and the anniversaries and birthdays and things that clearly she was missing. And I had just this really deep anger, and no place to put it. You know, there's nobody here on earth that you can direct that at. Likely the second anniversary would have been around COVID. So there was a lot of isolation too. Things weren't normal.
On top of feeling isolated already because of your grief.
Right.
And I think we've talked about in general that our culture just doesn't accept death and dying. And people certainly don't want to bear witness to a mother's grief.
Right. I remember I believe it was a post that I mentioned something about a hug in the grocery store a few weeks after the service, and an acquaintance, I wouldn't say she was a close friend, but she knew Jessica and her family, and she knew me and my husband. And I came around the corner in the grocery aisle, and there she is standing there, and she just reached out with her arms and just gave me a big hug and didn't say a word. We didn't need to say anything. She let me cry. And that is the kind of thing I believe people need. And yeah, it's awkward for somebody walking by and seeing that, no matter where it is, grocery store or a restaurant or any place in public. But there is such a fear of our culture to talk about or be present with someone who has lost someone.
I'd say as a whole, we're pretty grief illiterate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I oftentimes think when we go through tragic events and we're met with grief, we sort of think of it as almost like a victim complex, like it happened to us. But grief is something that we can consider, contemplate, reflect on, talk about, learn, educate ourselves long before it comes on our front doorstep, so that we're not taken aback by it so strongly. Now, it's never the right time and it's never going to be easy, but I think as a culture, if we started to open ourselves up to grief a little more, it might be a tad more productive and holistic for our society. But that's just my 2 cents. Feel free to push back if you disagree.
No, I totally get it. And everyone is going to experience grief at some point, whether it's the loss of a job or a pet. It doesn't have to be somebody close to you, but it's inevitable. We're all going to have it.
Did you talk with Jessica about the possibility that she might die?
I don't remember exactly having that conversation. I do remember asking her if she would write letters to the kids, and she told me that she did, but we never found them. We had conversations about the business, about, I remember distinctly having a day where she and I sat down with the laptop because she was on disability, so she was at home, her house, and I would take the laptop over there and we would do a few hours of work, and I would get passwords and access to different accounts and contact names and things like that. And it was really hard for me to believe that she was not going to be around at some point. And I remember saying that statement to her, that I'm so afraid that you're not going to be here when I need you. And it happened. It did happen. After she passed away, there were plenty of times I wasn't able to access something. I didn't have a contact information that I needed. And it just pissed me off.
Just a brutal reminder over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how was Jeremy during this time?
He was a rock to me. I know he was struggling a lot. He didn't attend different functions. There was a beautiful fundraiser for her family around the holidays in 2018 that started out to be something small once her friends realized, that she was on hospice. They wanted to help support her husband and the kids during the holiday season. And he didn't attend that. It was just too hard for him to be around people and her in that environment. He did spend a lot of time with her individually. He would go over and bring her lunch. And towards the end, he would, her favorite food at that point was French fries. And he would stop and pick up French fries for her. But during the months that she was going through treatment, he and I would meet, I know, probably once a week for lunch or dinner, and he would just let me unload. And I kept thinking to myself at the time, if only this, then things will be better. And if only she could, have this resource or have this support. And honestly, at that point, even before she started hospice, she was tired. She was tired of the treatment, and it was hard to watch her move forward.
I mean, I can't compare to what you've been through, but I can't help but imagine it's different than experience the death of a young child who's living in your home at the time of their passing. What is it like to lose an adult child who has children and their own life?
I don't have a word. It was devastating. And I guess if I can reflect, I hope that I did the best I could. I trust that I did the best I could at being present for her, for her husband, for the kids. Being in the moment and just, I was in denial. I know I was really being hopeful that something was going to be different and have a more positive outcome. But I felt like I was kind of writing a script for how the boys were going to move through this. And they needed, I felt like as much of my purpose was to give them a sense of stability. We reached out to the Dempsey Center and we were able to use their services a lot. I used them a lot. I took the boys for counseling. Jessica chose not to use their services. And, that was certainly her choice. I was just glad that they were available to us as a family.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot of resources in our conversation already, and we'll make sure we'll make those in the show notes so people can access them as well. So you took on the role of supporting everyone, it sounds like, and probably your husband too, right? And your son-in-law. And how do you do that when you're in so much personal pain yourself?
I think the saving grace for me was my writing. I kept journals everywhere. I had a journal on my phone. So if I was in an appointment, I could grab my phone and make some notes. I always had a stack of note cards with me in my purse. I had a physical journal at home. So those are the notes that I use for my blogging, for the notes moving forward on this second book. That to me, I guess, kept me somewhat grounded and also able to go back and look and see what was happening at a certain time and how I managed it after it passed. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah, to be able to go back and really relive it with a different frame of mind. What have you learned about yourself personally, about the grief process when you reflect on that?
I guess it's given me a sense of pride that, because you can't go back and do it again, that I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. Sometimes it's hard to accept that I couldn't have done, could I have done this better? Of course, but I didn't have the information at the time to know how to do it differently. I hope that answers the question.
Definitely does. You've dedicated so much of your life's work to helping other people with self-care. What are your own self-nurturing habits? And what advice would you give another grieving mom specifically?
Self-care is definitely at the top of the list for grief. I think because of my work in the holistic field, and having some experiences of my own where I knew my self-care was not what it needed to be, putting myself last, led to some health issues. I think, well, there's a really good saying about you can't, it's like on the airplane, you need to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help somebody else. And especially with motherhood, I guess it overflows into caregiving that you can't take care of anybody else if you're not taking care of yourself. And yet people in the healthcare industry, from what I remember in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, was giving. You just give yourself away. You give all of yourself to help somebody else, and you forget to fill up. And you're doing nobody any good.
That's such an important message. It really is. So as a healer, I'm kind of curious to know, how do you evaluate any given time what works and what doesn't?
Oh, it's so much easier working on people that are not your family.
I imagine that's true.
Yeah, you don't have that connection. And you can offer resources and suggestions and then let it go, trusting that they're going to take what fits for them, but you don't have an attachment to that at the time. When it's your family, of course, when Jessica was going through the second experience with cancer, there were so many things. I was reading about this, and I was hearing about this treatment and this new experimental thing, and she didn't want to have anything to do with it. And there was at one point where I remember standing in my kitchen, and she said something to me about someone wanting her to try this new macrobiotic diet and blah, blah, blah. And she didn't want to even talk to that person ever again. And I said, I want to be part of this journey with you. And if I'm asking you to do something that you don't want to do, you need to tell me. Because I didn't want her to turn me away either at that point. So I think it's wonderful and loving to have an idea for someone's idyllic outcome, but we don't have any control over that. We can't control what they choose to do. And we have to respect what that is.
So shifting gears a little bit, because you and I had a previous conversation before our recording today, but I know your son-in-law recently remarried. And another part of the ever-evolving and changing grief, I think. How are you doing with that? And does that intensify your grief in any way? Does it resurface in unexpected ways?
I think this year has been a hard year anyway, because it's 5 years from when she was on hospice. And we're coming up on the actual 5th anniversary of her passing. I am so grateful to have this woman in our lives who has brought such sense of groundedness to that family, and has actually brought a stepsister in for the boys. And I think they are well adjusted, as much as I could ever have dreamed. I couldn't have known, 4 years ago where they would be today. And I am truly grateful that they are where they are, the whole family.
That's great. So as you just mentioned, it's 5 years in January of 2024 since Jessica passed. What would you say has changed about your own grief? And how is your life now?
My life is really good. We've moved. So this house that we're in now, Jessica never saw. And that was a really hard thing for me to let go of, to leave the space that I knew that she knew.
Yes, please tell me about that, because we are still living in the house where Cassidy lived. Her room is exactly the way it was on the last day that she was here. So very curious to know how that felt and how you got through that process.
At the time that we built our house on the lake in Wyndham, she was very active working with her dad for the construction business. So she was very involved in every part of the process. And she had a room, the boys had a room downstairs. It started out to be a camp that turned out to be a beautiful year-round home that we eventually moved into permanently, even when she was still alive. After she passed away, her room and the boys' room downstairs, I just couldn't. I wanted so badly to change it and to shift the energy, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It took me 3 years to finally have somebody come in and give me some ideas about what to do, and then do a complete renovation. And within 3 months, we had the house on the market. So something did change, and it took me a long time to get to a place of being ready to let go of that house. I had, at her service, I had a big table with river rocks on it, small little river rocks that people could write messages to her. So all those stones came home from the service, and they were in my garden at the house on the lake. So those I've taken here to the new place with me. And that's been kind of I guess a transition, able to bring her here. It's been interesting. The past several years have been different. The very first year, the first anniversary, my new daughter-in-law was with the boys because I was traveling. My husband and I were traveling for that first anniversary. And she kept the boys home from school that day, and they did something fun. And I was incredibly grateful for that because I couldn't be there with them. And last year also we were traveling. This year I have plans to get together with them on the day before because they'll be back in school for the actual day of. And we'll probably go to lunch and do something fun and talk about our memories of her.
Yeah, I imagine it's really important for you and for them.
Yeah.
Keep her spirit alive.
It is fun to listen to them mention little memories now and then, like cinnamon buns at Christmas time, or just random things that come up. It really bring a smile to my face.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So, as we always do at the end of our podcast, we want to ask you what you want people to know and remember about your daughter, Jessica.
I like to remember her independent, generous spirit. She was a very determined and headstrong child and young woman, but she cared about people very deeply. And when it was her turn to be on the receiving end of someone else taking care of them, she left me with a great memory.
I feel like I know her in many ways, reading your book and talking with you. And so we really appreciate you coming here today and joining us on the podcast and sharing this experience. And the important advice I think you've been giving to bereaved parents about caring for themselves is so important. And of course, just sharing the life of Jessica. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Julie. This was really a great conversation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
As
Appreciate
long
it.
as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love.